The morning sun burned mercilessly over Fort Irwin, California, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Heat waves distorted the horizon where M1A2 SCP-V3 Abrams tanks moved across the terrain, their distinctive tiger stripe paint schemes marking them as part of the legendary 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. Dust plumes followed each vehicle like ghostly apparitions, testament to decades of warriors who had trained on the same unforgiving ground. Captain Frank Thunder Harrington stood at the lead tank's open commander's hatch, the metal hot enough to sear skin beneath his gloved hand. At 58, he was an anomaly in active service, a relic of another era kept on for his irreplaceable experience. 3 wars had carved his weathered face with lines that no amount of desert sun could darken further. Silver-tinged stubble framed a jaw set with the determination that had earned him his call sign decades earlier. His blue eyes remained sharp and vigilant, constantly scanning the horizon with the instinct of a predator born from survival rather than simulation. The desert air shimmered around him, carrying the familiar sense of scorched metal, diesel, and sweat that had defined half his life. Every detail of the terrain registered in his mind automatically, a habit from years when missing a fold in the ground could mean death for an entire crew. Harrington absently checked his old mechanical Seiko watch against the digital display in the tank. The analog watch was 5 seconds faster. He nodded with satisfaction. The watch had been with him since Desert Storm, reliable when electronics failed in sandstorms that swallowed entire platoons. Always trust what you can repair with your own hands, he muttered, the mantra as much a part of him as his dog tags. The convoy reached a natural depression in the terrain that would serve as today's classroom. Harrington descended from the tank with practiced ease that belied his age, his movements economical and purposeful. His boots struck the desert floor with a certainty that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he stood for in a rapidly changing world. Young tank crews gathered around him, most in their 20s, born after he'd earned his first combat patch. Their faces showed a mixture of respect, curiosity, and sometimes barely concealed impatience. They had grown up with touch screens and GPS, with systems that talked to them and anticipated their needs. They knew war through the sanitized lens of embedded journalists and precision strikes. They had never had to navigate by stars alone, had never felt the cold weight of fear when every system went dark and enemy fire found their position. "Welcome to your real education, gentlemen," Harrington announced, his voice carrying across the group without needing to shout, the resonance of command earned through decades. The finest tank the world has ever known sits beneath your boots. The M1A2 SCP-V3 is the culmination of decades of engineering excellence and combat experience. He ran a calloused hand along the armored side with the tenderness of a man touching a beloved horse, feeling the heat radiating from metal baked under the California sun. But this machine is only as good as the men who operate it. Today we're going to talk about what happens when every screen goes dark, when every system fails, when it's just you, your training, and your crew between life and death. From the back of the group, a throat cleared deliberately, the sound like a gauntlet thrown down in the quiet desert air. "Captain, with all due respect, the redundant systems on the SCP-V3 make total failure statistically improbable. We should focus on maximizing the effectiveness of the integrated fire control systems, rather than preparing for scenarios that modern engineering has rendered obsolete." Lieutenant Robert Mitchell stepped forward, tall and immaculate despite the desert heat. At 32, he had the polished look of someone who'd spent more time in simulators and classrooms than in actual tanks. His West Point education was evident in his bearing and speech, his uniform creased despite the heat, his sunglasses reflecting Harrington's image back at him. The older men among the crews exchanged glances. They'd seen this confrontation brewing from the moment the training schedule had been posted. Old school versus new school, experience versus technology, analog versus digital. Harrington studied Mitchell for a moment, seeing not just a young officer but a symbol of the new army, driven by algorithms and artificial intelligence, where human judgment was increasingly seen as a liability rather than an asset. "Lieutenant Mitchell." Harrington smiled without warmth, the expression never reaching his eyes. "I'm aware of the statistics. I've read all the technical manuals and engineering specifications. I'm also aware that statistically improbable events have a way of becoming certainties when bullets are flying and men are dying." He turned to the group, his voice dropping slightly, forcing them to lean in. Today, you will navigate to objective points using only terrain association. No GPS, no digital maps, no satellite imagery, just your eyes, your training, and your brain. Mitchell couldn't contain himself, his shoulders squaring with the righteousness of technical superiority. Sir, that seems unnecessarily primitive. The integrated navigation systems failed completely during a sandstorm in Iraq in 2007. Harrington interrupted, his voice cutting through Mitchell's protest like a blade. The result was 3 tanks separated from their unit for 18 hours in hostile territory. 2 crews survived, 1 didn't. Silence fell over the group, heavy as armor plate. Even Mitchell had no immediate response. I knew each man in those crews, Lieutenant. I wrote letters to the families of the men we lost. That's the difference between training for the technology and training for when the technology fails you. Harrington pulled out laminated maps from his cargo pocket, the paper creased and worn from use. Traditional navigation it is. Get to your vehicles. The crews dispersed, moving with renewed purpose, Mitchell lingering last, his expression a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. As they mounted up, Harrington felt a familiar presence at his side, the sense of someone who had occupied that same space through firefights and sandstorms, through victory and heartbreaking loss. Still fighting the good fight, I see, said Master Sergeant William Bill Carter, his voice carrying the gravel of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. At 55, Carter was nearly as much of an anomaly as Harrington himself. His presence in the modern Army, a testament to his unmatched technical knowledge, rather than his ability to navigate the political waters of promotion. The two had served together since Desert Storm, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of combat, where trust was measured in blood and shared nightmares. Carter's face carried the same weathered look as Harrington's, his eyes holding the same mix of weariness and unbreakable resolve. He now served as the head of tank technical training, his knowledge of the Abrams platform unmatched by anyone except perhaps Harrington himself. Someone has to remind these kids that satellites can fail, but knowing your terrain never will, Harrington replied, watching the young crews prepare their vehicles, their movements a blend of practiced precision and modern casualness. Carter nodded, his eyes momentarily distant, seeing perhaps the same memories that sometimes woke Harrington in the small hours of the morning. They're good kids, Frank, just a different generation. They've never had to navigate by compass alone or fix a broken tank with nothing but basic tools and desperation. That's what worries me. Harrington watched Mitchell's tank particularly, noting the lieutenant's textbook procedures, everything by the manual but lacking the intuitive flow that came only from real experience. As the tanks rumbled to life around them, engines roaring in the desert silence, Carter handed Harrington a sealed envelope, the paper already wilting in the heat. What's this? Orders came through this morning. Carter's expression was unreadable, a skill developed through years of high-stakes poker games in forward operating bases across the Middle East. Special exercise coming up. Red Thunder, they're calling it. Command wants a full-scale opposition force engagement. Real deal, not the usual scripted training. Harrington broke the seal and skimmed the contents, the official language and bureaucratic formatting failing to disguise the implications. His eyebrows rose as he read, understanding dawning like incoming artillery. They want me to command OPFOR, using the old surrogate vehicles? The opposition force, OPFOR in military parlance, traditionally used modified equipment to simulate enemy capabilities, often older and less capable than frontline units. Carter grinned, the expression lightening his face by a decade. Apparently someone up the chain remembers you raising hell with those old beasts back in the day. Figure you might teach the new blood a lesson about relying too much on their fancy toys. Harrington folded the orders carefully, tucking them into his pocket. A slow smile spread across his face, the kind that had made more than one superior officer nervous over the years. Now that could be interesting. Who's commanding the Abrams force? Carter's expression shifted slightly, a tell that only someone who had known him for 30 years would catch. Mitchell. Of course. Harrington's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened to blue stone. This should be educational for everyone involved. They watched as Mitchell's tank departed, leading the column with perfect textbook precision, the angles and spacing exactly as prescribed in the field manual. Too perfect, Harrington muttered, seeing not efficiency but vulnerability in the formation. Like he's still in the simulator where the enemy always appears exactly where the scenario designers placed them. He scored highest in his class on the technical evaluations, Carter offered, playing devil's advocate as he had countless times in tactical discussions over decades. I'm sure he did, but out here, heat bakes circuit boards, dust clogs filters, and the unexpected is the only thing you can count on. Harrington watched the tanks grow smaller in the distance. Let's see how his technical excellence holds up when nothing goes according to plan. The training day progressed under the relentless sun, temperatures climbing to punishing levels that tested both men and machines. Harrington observed from a command vehicle, tracking the tank's progress through binoculars, noting how each crew adapted to the challenges he'd set. Most navigated adequately, finding their way to the designated objectives despite the lack of electronic aids, their movements becoming more confident as the day wore on. Mitchell's tank, however, moved with increasing uncertainty, obviously struggling without GPS guidance, making wider turns and longer stops at each waypoint. The young lieutenant's frustration was evident even at a distance, his commands to his crew coming more frequently and with less patience. By mid-afternoon, Harrington ordered a simulated communications blackout, forcing the crews to rely on visual signals and prearranged contingencies. Some adapted quickly, falling back on training that many had considered obsolete. Others struggled, their movements becoming hesitant and disjointed. Mitchell's tank came into a complete stop, disoriented in a featureless stretch of desert, turning slowly as if searching for landmarks that existed only on digital maps. He's lost, Carter observed, no satisfaction in his voice, only the professional assessment of someone who had seen the same mistake cost lives. Completely, Harrington agreed, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction before keying his radio. Exercise concluded. All units returned to base. At the post-exercise briefing, Mitchell's frustration was evident. His immaculate uniform was now dust-covered, his face flushed with heat and embarrassment. The other crews showed varying degrees of fatigue and accomplishment, the day's lessons etched in sweat and sunburn. "Lieutenant," Harrington addressed Mitchell directly, his tone professionally neutral, "care to share your assessment of today's performance?" Mitchell straightened, his pride visibly wrestling with honesty. "We were handicapped by artificial constraints, sir. In a real combat situation, we would have access to our full suite of navigational aids and communication systems. Would you?" Harrington looked around the assembled crews, his gaze encompassing veterans and novices alike. "Anyone here ever experience equipment failure in the field?" Several hands went up, mostly from the older soldiers. "Communications blackout?" More hands. "GPS jamming or spoofing?" Fewer this time, but still several. "The technology is a tool, Lieutenant, not a crutch. When it works, it's magnificent. When it fails, and it will fail at the worst possible moment. What you did today is what stands between mission success and failure, between life and death." Mitchell nodded stiffly, but said nothing, his expression suggesting that the lesson had been received, if not yet fully accepted. As the crews dispersed, Harrington's radio crackled with a summons that interrupted his thoughts. "Captain Harrington, report to Colonel Wilson's office immediately." He exchanged a glance with Carter, years of shared experience, allowing volumes of communication without words. "Now what?" Carter shrugged, his expression neutral. "Red Thunder preparations, probably." "Maybe." But Harrington had a feeling there was more to it than that, an instinct born from decades of military politics and the sudden acceleration of events. Colonel James Wilson's office was an oasis of climate-controlled calm amid the desert base, the air conditioning a sharp contrast to the punishing heat outside. The colonel himself sat behind a polished desk, reviewing documents on a tablet, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. At 50, Wilson represented a bridge between old-school officers like Harrington and the tech-savvy younger generation, having come of age during the military's digital transformation. "Frank, good to see you," Wilson greeted, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. His manner was friendly but formal, a subtle indication that this wasn't a casual conversation. "I assume you've been briefed on Operation Red Thunder," Wilson said after pleasantries had been exchanged, his fingers steepled before him. "Just the basics, sir. I'll be commanding the OPFOR element using surrogate vehicles against Lieutenant Mitchell's Abrams platoon." "That's correct, but there's more." Wilson leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly, though they were alone in the office. "General Richard Mitchell will be observing this exercise personally." Harrington's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips, the name registering immediately. "Lieutenant Mitchell's father." "The same, and before you ask, yes, that's part of why his son was selected to command the opposing force. Nepotism isn't what it used to be if he's setting the kid up for failure," Harrington remarked dryly, though he suspected the situation was more complex than simple favoritism. Wilson's expression remained neutral, years of Pentagon service having perfected his poker face. It's not that simple, Frank. This exercise is a proof of concept. General Mitchell has been pushing for a complete overhaul of tank crew training. He believes we can cut traditional field exercises by 60% and replace them with advanced simulation and virtual reality training. The implications settled over Harrington like artillery fire finding its range. And Red Thunder is designed to validate his approach. If the modern Abrams force, trained with his simulation-heavy program, performs well against your traditionally trained up-for using inferior equipment, he gets his funding, Harrington finished, the political maneuvering becoming clear. Military budgets were always contentious, with traditional training often first on the chopping block when new technologies promise more efficiency. Precisely. But if your op4 demonstrates that traditional skills and tactics can overcome technological superiority, then maybe we keep teaching tankers to be tankers, not just system operators. Wilson nodded, relief evident in his posture. That's why I requested you specifically for this, Frank. You're the best chance we have at a fair assessment. Fair? I'll be commanding retrofit M113s against state-of-the-art Abrams tanks. That's not exactly a level playing field, which makes it all the more significant if you succeed. Wilson's eyes met Harrington's, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Both had seen promising technologies fail catastrophically in real combat conditions. Both had written too many letters to families. Harrington considered this, weighing the challenge against the stakes. When does the exercise begin? You have 1 week to prepare your op4 team. And who will I be commanding? Wilson slid a folder across the desk, the personnel files inside representing Harrington's resources for the coming challenge. We've assembled a special unit, some veterans nearing retirement, some younger soldiers who haven't thrived in the new system but show potential in traditional skills. Harrington flipped through the personnel files, recognizing a few names, including Bill Carter's. His friend's inclusion was both reassuring and concerning, given Carter's recent subdued demeanor. Bill requested assignment to your team specifically, Wilson explained, catching Harrington's pause. Said something about one last ride. After the meeting, Harrington found Carter waiting near the motor pool, smoking a cigarette against regulations, the ember glowing in the gathering dusk. The older sergeant ground the butt under his boot as Harrington approached, a guilty gesture that had become ritual over 30 years. So we're test subjects in General Mitchell's grand experiment, Carter concluded after hearing about the meeting, his voice betraying no surprise, only resignation tinged with determination. More or less, they walked to the tank hangar where the surrogate vehicles were stored, their boots raising small dust clouds in the dry desert air. Unlike the gleaming Abrams tanks housed in the main facilities, these were modified M113 armored personnel carriers with simulated turrets and weapon systems. They were painted in the distinctive tiger stripe pattern of the 11th ACR, but the effect was more weathered than intimidating. Vehicles from another era pressed into service to play the opposition. Home sweet home, Carter said, patting the side of the nearest vehicle with familiar affection. Remember when we used to call these Kovian variant tanks? Supposed to look like Soviet equipment. Harrington nodded, memories flooding back of younger days when these vehicles were cutting edge, when the Soviet threat was tangible rather than historical. Supposed to simulate Soviet T-72s. We spent more time keeping them running than actually training in them. Still cheaper than running the real M1s. $200 a mile, last I heard. They inspected the vehicles with experienced eyes, looking past cosmetic issues to assess actual capabilities and limitations. The surrogate vehicles had Bradley turrets with simulated weapon systems that could kill an Abrams in the exercise, but only if used with perfect tactical precision. We'll need to train the crews extensively on terrain utilization, Harrington mused, already formulating strategies. Use every fold in the ground, every shadow. Hit and move, never stay exposed. Carter nodded, then suddenly leaned against the vehicle, a grimace crossing his face before he could mask it, his hand pressing against his side in an unconscious gesture. Bill, you all right? Harrington's question was casual, but his observation was that of someone who had watched for signs of injury on battlefields where admitting weakness could be fatal. Carter waved him off, straightening with visible effort. Fine, just tired. These young bucks keep me running. Harrington studied his friend carefully, seeing details that concern brought into sharp focus. Carter had lost weight recently, his uniform hanging slightly where it once had fit perfectly. The desert tan couldn't quite hide the pallor beneath, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent shadows. "How long have we known each other, Bill?" The question was gentle but carried the weight of shared history, of nights spent waiting for dawn in hostile territory, of victories and losses marked in blood and medal ceremonies. Carter straightened up, avoiding Harrington's gaze, his attention suddenly focused on the surrogate vehicle's treads. "Too damn long." "Then don't insult me by lying." There was no anger in Harrington's voice, only the quiet certainty of someone who had earned the right to truth through decades of loyalty. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of vehicles moving on the base and the ever-present desert wind. Finally, Carter sighed, the sound carrying defeat that no enemy had ever managed to inflict. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The words hit Harrington like physical blows, each one landing with devastating clarity. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He had seen enough men die to know what that combination meant. "How long have you known?" "Couple months. Got the final diagnosis last week." Carter's voice remained steady, professional detachment covering the reality beneath. "Not much they can do at this point except make me comfortable, which isn't exactly my style." "And you're still here because where else would I be?" Carter finally met his friend's eyes, his expression challenging anyone to suggest he belonged anywhere else. "This is where I belong, with the tanks, with the regiment." "What about treatment options?" "There aren't many. 6 months, maybe less." Carter's voice remained steady, matter of fact. "That's why I wanted this assignment, Frank. One last mission, something that matters." Harrington absorbed this, the reality sinking in with crushing weight. Bill Carter had been more than a colleague, more than a friend. They had faced death together in distant deserts, had pulled each other through the worst moments of their lives. The thought of losing him was almost incomprehensible, a fundamental reordering of Harrington's world. "This Red Thunder exercise," Carter continued, his voice finding strength and purpose. "It's not just about saving traditional training methods. It's about making sure the next generation of tankers has the skills they need to survive, to come home." "Like Jake didn't," Harrington said softly, the name emerging from memories both had carried for years. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with significance. Jake Simmons had been their gunner during the first Iraq deployment, a brilliant young soldier with uncanny instincts and a gift for making the impossible shot. He had died when their tank's electrical system failed during a night operation, leaving them vulnerable to an enemy they couldn't see coming. "Exactly like Jake," Carter confirmed, his eyes holding the same shadows Harrington knew were in his own. "If those kids rely only on their fancy systems, if they never learn what to do when everything goes dark and the enemy is still out there, we'll lose more Jakes. That's why this matters." For the next several days, Harrington drove the OPFOR team relentlessly, developing tactics specifically designed to counter the Abrams' technological advantages. They practiced ambush techniques, coordinated fire and movement, and emergency procedures for when their limited systems inevitably failed under pressure. On the fourth day, Harrington received a summons to Colonel Wilson's office. The news was not good. "General Mitchell has decided to accelerate the Red Thunder timeline," Wilson informed him. "The exercise will begin day after tomorrow." "That's a significant compression of our preparation schedule," Harrington responded, keeping his tone professionally neutral despite the obvious manipulation. "In real combat, you rarely get ideal preparation time," General Mitchell said, appearing from an adjoining room. "Consider it an added element of realism." The general was tall and imposing, with the same chiseled features as his son, but hardened by decades of military politics. His uniform bore the stars of rank earned through ambition as much as merit, his bearing that of someone accustomed to deference. The challenge was clear. Harrington met the general's gaze steadily. "My team will perform to the best of their abilities regardless of the timeline, sir." After the meeting, Wilson revealed more. "The revised parameters are more restrictive for OPFOR. You'll be limited to designated engagement zones. No freedom to maneuver through the entire exercise area as originally planned. Channeling us into kill zones where the M1's advantages are maximized," Harrington observed. "That's the practical effect, yes." Harrington returned to the training area, his mind racing with adjustments. The compressed timeline and restricted movement areas would require completely new tactics. "So we're being set up to fail," Carter observed when briefed. "More or less." "What are we going to do?" Harrington smiled grimly. "What we've always done, Bill, adapt and overcome." Through the night, they planned and strategized. By dawn, a new approach had emerged, one that Harrington believed could work despite the restrictions. It would require perfect execution, split-second timing, and a bit of luck. As the sun rose over the desert, Harrington stood alone for a moment, watching the light change the landscape. In just over 24 hours, this same terrain would be the stage for a contest with implications far beyond a simple training exercise. The day of Operation Red Thunder dawned with unexpected weather. A wall of dark clouds loomed on the horizon, unusual for the desert even in spring. Meteorologists predicted a dust storm by afternoon, but the exercise would proceed regardless. Harrington gathered his OFR team for a final briefing. Today is not just an exercise. Today is about proving that the human element remains the decisive factor in tank warfare, regardless of technology. We are outgunned, out-armored, and technically outmatched in every way. But we have preparation, we have tactics, and most importantly, we have each other. As the crews dispersed to their vehicles, Carter approached Harrington, extending his hand. "Good hunting, Frank." Harrington clasped his friend's hand firmly. "You too, Bill. See you on the other side." Harrington climbed into a surrogate tank, settling into the commander's position. The interior was cramped compared to an Abrams, the system's rudimentary. But it felt familiar, a return to basics after years of increasing technological complexity. His crew was quiet, focused on their pre-operation checks. Rivera was his driver, specially selected for his terrain instincts. "Ready for this, Rivera?" Harrington asked. "Yes, sir, we all are." The radio crackled with Colonel Wilson's voice. "Operation Red Thunder is now active. Good luck to all participants." With a rumble of engines, the surrogate vehicles moved out, deploying according to their carefully developed plan. They established an initial defensive line in one of the restricted zones, creating a formidable barrier that would force Mitchell's M1 platoon to choose between a frontal assault or a time-consuming flanking maneuver. As they moved into position, the dust storm drew closer. The wind picked up, carrying fine particles that reduced visibility. For the OPFOR, with their limited optical systems, this was both challenge and opportunity. Intelligence from forward observers indicated that Mitchell's platoon was advancing from the northeast, moving cautiously but steadily toward the defensive line. The M1s would have better visibility through the dust with their advanced thermal imaging, but the storm would still complicate their operations. 4 M1s advancing in diamond formation, reported Rivera, who had been detached as a forward observer. Range approximately 2,000 meters and closing. Harrington studied his map, visualizing the M1 platoon's approach. They were following a predictable route, one that would bring them into direct contact with the OPFOR's strongest defensive position. "Too cautious," Harrington murmured to himself. Against a real enemy, such predictability would be deadly. The dust storm intensified, visibility dropping further. Then Rivera reported that the M1s had changed formation, spreading out to envelop their position from multiple angles. Harrington smiled grimly. Mitchell had recognized the trap and was adapting. Good. All OPFOR elements prepare to execute Contingency Plan Delta. This was what they had trained for. As the M1 platoons spread out to envelop them, the OPFOR would execute a fighting withdrawal, falling back to prepared positions that would force the Abrams tanks to pursue through increasingly restrictive terrain. The battle was joined in earnest now, the exercise moving from positioning to engagement. Through the swirling dust, the first shots were exchanged, the simulation systems registering hits and misses with electronic precision. An hour into the engagement, the situation had developed according to Harrington's expectations. Mitchell's platoon had pursued the retreating OPFOR elements, becoming stretched out and somewhat disorganized in the process. Now was the time for the counterattack. All OPFOR elements execute Phoenix. The OPFOR vehicles, which had appeared to be in disorganized retreat, suddenly reversed course in a coordinated maneuver. Teams that had been separated now converged from multiple directions, catching the M1 platoon in a classic hammer and anvil attack. In the dust and confusion, the surrogate vehicle's limitations became less significant. The close quarters negated the M1's long-range advantages, and the multiple attack angles overwhelmed their ability to respond effectively. Harrington's command vehicle pushed forward with the main assault element, directly engaging Mitchell's command tank. Through the swirling dust, he could see the distinctive silhouette of the M1A2, its turret traversing to track the sudden threat. "Driver, hard left," Harrington ordered. "Gunner, target at 2 o'clock, range 800 meters. The surrogate vehicle swerved, narrowly avoiding incoming fire. The gunner acquired the target and simulated firing. The hit registered in the exercise control system, temporarily disabling the M1's main gun. Throughout the battlefield, similar engagements were unfolding. The OPFOR teams, using their practiced tactics and intimate knowledge of the terrain, were scoring hit after hit against the technically superior but now disorganized M1 platoon. Two M1s disabled at grid reference Charlie 5. One M1 immobilized at Delta 9. The reports continued, painting a picture of unexpected success. The OPFOR strategy was working better than even Harrington had dared hope. Then came the transmission he had been waiting for. Mitchell's command tank isolated at Echo 2. Request permission to engage. I'll handle this personally. With practiced precision, Harrington maneuvered his vehicle to a firing position that offered maximum cover while maintaining a clear shot at the M1's vulnerable rear quarter. Gunner, target at 11 o'clock, range 600 meters. Fire when ready. The simulated shot registered a direct hit. In a real engagement, it would have been catastrophic for the Abrams. In the exercise, it registered as a mobility kill, effectively eliminating Mitchell's command tank from the battle. As the dust began to settle, the outcome became clear. The OPFOR had achieved what many had thought impossible, a decisive victory against a technologically superior force under restricted conditions. Colonel Wilson's voice came over the command channel. Exercise Red Thunder is concluded. All vehicles return to starting positions for assessment. As they began their return journey, Harrington allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Despite the stacked odds, despite the accelerated timeline, they had proven their point. The human element, properly trained and led, could still overcome technological advantages. But as his vehicle crested a rise, he saw something that instantly banished all thoughts of victory. In the distance, an emergency vehicle's lights flashed near one of the OPFOR tanks. Even from this distance, Harrington recognized it as Carter's command vehicle. "Driver, maximum speed," he ordered, his voice tight with sudden dread. "Get us to that vehicle now." As they approached, Harrington could see medics surrounding a figure on the ground. His heart sank. Bill Carter lay on the desert floor, his face ashen, eyes closed. A medic was performing CPR, another preparing a defibrillator. "What happened?" Harrington demanded. "He collapsed, sir, right after the exercise ended. Said he couldn't breathe, then just fell." Harrington knelt beside his friend, taking his hand. It was still warm but unresponsive. "Come on, Bill," he whispered. "Not like this. Not now." The medics continued their efforts, but with diminishing urgency. Finally, one of them looked up at Harrington, shaking his head slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, he's gone." The words hit like physical blows. Around him, OPFOR crew members removed their helmets, heads bowed in respect. Harrington remained kneeling, still holding Carter's hand. In that moment, the victory they had achieved seemed hollow, meaningless compared to the loss of his oldest friend. "He knew this might happen," Colonel Wilson said quietly when he arrived. "He left instructions. Wanted to be part of this exercise regardless of the risk." Harrington nodded, unable to speak. "The results were conclusive," Wilson continued. "Up for victory across all metrics. General Mitchell is processing the implications. I don't care about that right now." "I know, but Bill would have. This mattered to him. You made it matter." Harrington looked across the battlefield, where their improbable victory had unfolded, then back to where his friend now lay. "One last mission," he murmured. Lieutenant Mitchell approached, removing his helmet. "Captain Harrington, I just heard about Master Sergeant Carter. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Lieutenant. He was a fine soldier. His tactics today were exemplary. We have much to learn from them." Despite his grief, Harrington recognized the significance of this admission. "The human element, Lieutenant. Technology changes, but the fundamentals of combat remain the same. Know your enemy, know your terrain, and most importantly, know what to do when everything goes wrong." "Lessons I won't forget, sir." That evening, as the base processed the dual shocks of OPFOR's unexpected victory and Carter's sudden death, Harrington sat alone in his quarters. On the table before him lay Carter's personal effects, including an envelope addressed simply, Frank. With fingers that weren't quite steady, Harrington opened it, finding a handwritten letter inside. "Frank," it began, "if you're reading this, then I've punched out ahead of schedule. Don't waste time feeling sorry about it. We both know I was living on borrowed time anyway. What matters is that we made our point. I'm assuming we won. If not, well then I'm glad I didn't stick around to see it." A small smile touched Harrington's lips despite everything. "This cancer thing is a hell of a way to go. Not how I imagined it. Always figured it would be quick, some IED or tank round with my name on it. But I guess we don't get to choose our exits, just how we face them. You've been the best friend a soldier could ask for. From Desert Storm to this last mission, there's no one I'd rather have had watching my back. Take care of yourself, and take care of those kids. They're the future of the Armor Corps, whether General Mitchell likes it or not. One last thing, in my footlocker, you'll find Jake's old compass. He'd want you to have it. Remember what he always said, technology points the way, but instinct gets you home. Until Fiddler's Green, Bill. Harrington carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Then he opened the footlocker, finding the compass nestled among Carter's few personal possessions. It was old, the brass case dented and worn, but the needle still pointed true. He held it in his palm, remembering Jake's words, spoken so long ago in another desert. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he was surprised to find Lieutenant Mitchell standing there. "Captain Harrington, may I speak with you?" Mitchell seemed uncomfortable. "I wanted to inform you personally, my father has ordered a formal review of today's exercise." Meaning he's questioning the outcome. "Yes, sir. But I've submitted my own after-action report stating that Offer's victory was legitimate and decisive, the result of superior tactics and leadership despite technological disadvantages." This surprised Harrington. "That won't make you popular with your father, Lieutenant." Mitchell straightened. "Perhaps not, but it's the truth. What happened today matters. It has implications for how we train tank crews, how we balance technology with fundamental skills. And you're willing to take a stand on that?" "Yes, sir, I am." Mitchell's eyes fell on the compass. "Master Sergeant Carter's?" "A friend's from long ago." Mitchell nodded. "Sir, I've requested assignment to the 11th ACR training cadre after this deployment. I want to learn the methods you demonstrated today, integrate them with the technical approach I've been trained in." "Why?" "Because today showed me that I have gaps in my knowledge, dangerous gaps. In real combat, those gaps could cost lives." Harrington studied the younger officer with new respect. As Mitchell departed, Harrington returned to the window, looking out at the desert where the day's battle had unfolded. In his hand, Jake's compass gleamed in the dim light, the needle pointing steadily north. The day had brought both victory and loss, vindication and grief. Bill Carter was gone, but his final mission had been accomplished. They had proven that even in an age of technological marvels, the human element remained decisive. Technology could fail, systems could falter, but the human spirit, properly trained and led, would always find a way forward. Harrington carefully placed the compass on his desk and began writing his own after-action report. The battle might be over, but the war for the soul of tank warfare had just begun, and he would fight it to the end. For Jake, for Bill, for all of them. The desert dawn painted Fort Irwin in shades of amber and gold, the rising sun casting long shadows across the motor pool where tanks stood in silent formation. 2 weeks had passed since Operation Red Thunder, 2 weeks since Bill Carter's death. The base had returned to its normal rhythm, but for Captain Frank Harrington, nothing felt normal anymore. He stood alone beside Carter's former surrogate vehicle, now cleaned and prepped for the next op for rotation. His fingers traced the turret's edge, feeling the worn metal that had helped deliver their improbable victory, the victory that had cost his oldest friend's life. Every morning since the funeral, Harrington had found himself here at first light, drawn to this spot as if some fragment of Bill's spirit lingered among the steel and treads they had both loved. The motor pool was quiet at this hour, the day shift mechanics not yet arrived, the night crew already departed. The solitude suited him, gave him space to remember and to grieve in his own stoic way. This morning, like all the others, he mentally retraced the moments of their final mission together. The dust storm, the tactics they had developed against overwhelming technological superiority, the fierce satisfaction of proving their point, and then the aftermath, Bill collapsing as victory was confirmed, the frantic but futile medical intervention, the weight of his friend's hand growing cold in his own. "Thought I'd find you here," Colonel Wilson's voice came from behind him, disrupting his solemn reverie. Harrington didn't turn, keeping his gaze fixed on the surrogate vehicle. "Just saying goodbye. They're reassigning the vehicles tomorrow." Wilson stepped beside him, hands clasped behind his back, in the formal posture of a career officer delivering news. The official review of Red Thunder concluded yesterday. Now Harrington turned, studying his superior's face for clues. "And?" The results stand. Your OPFOR team achieved a legitimate tactical victory against superior forces. The Pentagon team couldn't find any procedural violations to invalidate the outcome. Wilson's expression held a mix of satisfaction and concern. General Mitchell isn't happy. I imagine not. Harrington felt no triumph in the confirmation, only a weary vindication. Bill had given his life for this result, for the principle it represented. At least that sacrifice wouldn't be erased by political maneuvering. He's modified his proposal, Wilson continued. Instead of cutting traditional field exercises by 60%, he's now suggesting a 40% reduction with integrated simulation and field components. Harrington nodded slowly, mentally calculating what this would mean for future training protocols. Better than nothing. It's more than that, Frank. It's an acknowledgement that your approach has merit. That's significant coming from someone at his level. Wilson looked around to ensure they were alone, then lowered his voice slightly. But there's more. The general has requested your presence at the Pentagon next week. He wants you to consult on the development of the new training protocol. Harrington raised an eyebrow, genuine surprise breaking through his habitual reserve. Me, the analog dinosaur? Precisely because you're the analog dinosaur, Wilson replied with a slight smile. He needs someone who will push back against the tech-heavy approach, keep things grounded in reality. And despite his resistance to your methods, he respects results. Red Thunder delivered undeniable results. Harrington considered this unexpected development. The Pentagon was the last place he'd ever expected to be invited, especially after challenging the modernization approach so directly. Is this a genuine consultation request? Or am I being sidelined where I can't influence the next generation of officers directly? Wilson's expression turned serious. Probably a bit of both, if I'm being honest. You made an impression on his son that has complicated the general's plans. But it's also a legitimate opportunity to shape the future of tank warfare training at a systemic level. Harrington looked back at the surrogate tank, remembering Bill's words. Take care of those kids. They're the future of the Armor Corps. Perhaps this was how he could best fulfill that promise, by influencing the very protocols that would govern their training for years to come. Yes, I'll do it. Good. Wilson handed him a folder containing temporary duty orders and travel information. Your assignment to Washington begins Monday. In the meantime, there's someone who wants to speak with you. As Wilson departed, Harrington saw Lieutenant Robert Mitchell approaching across the motor pool. The younger officer had changed in the weeks since Red Thunder. His uniform was still impeccable, but his bearing had softened somehow, the rigid precision replaced by something more measured, more adaptable. Captain Harrington, Mitchell greeted him with a respectful nod. Do you have a moment, sir? Of course, Lieutenant. Harrington tucked the Pentagon orders into his pocket, giving Mitchell his full attention. Mitchell gestured toward the surrogate tank, their weathered forms contrasting sharply with the gleaming M1A2s parked nearby. I've been studying the after-action reports from Red Thunder, analyzing how your teams achieved what they did with such limited equipment. And what have you concluded? Harrington watched Mitchell's face, curious about the young officer's evolution since their confrontation before the exercise. That I was wrong, Mitchell said it plainly, without defensiveness or qualification. Not about the technology, the M1A2 systems are exceptional, but about the primacy of those systems over human judgment and experience. He met Harrington's gaze directly. I've been reassigned. To where? Here, the 11th ACR training cadre, starting next month. There was unmistakable satisfaction in Mitchell's voice, though tempered with something that might have been apprehension. Harrington couldn't hide his surprise. After Red Thunder, he'd expected Mitchell to distance himself from the traditionalist approach, to seek assignments that would align more closely with his father's modernization initiatives. Your father approved this? A complex expression crossed Mitchell's face, loyalty and independence visibly warring. Not exactly. I went around him directly to General Thornton, made my case based on the Red Thunder results. He hesitated, then added quietly, my father and I aren't on speaking terms at the moment. That must be difficult. Harrington's tone held no judgment, only understanding. Family relationships within the military hierarchy could be challenging at the best of times. It is. Mitchell's voice was quiet but firm, the voice of a man who had made a difficult choice and was prepared to live with the consequences. But necessary. This isn't just about career paths, Captain. It's about preparing soldiers for the realities they'll face. After what I saw in Red Thunder, I can't in good conscience teach a purely technology-focused approach. Harrington studied the younger officer with new appreciation. It took significant moral courage to stand against not only the institutional momentum, but also one's own father, especially when that father was a general officer with considerable influence. That takes courage, Lieutenant. I had good examples. Mitchell cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the implicit praise. I was hoping, that is, I was wondering if you might consider mentoring me before your Pentagon assignment. There are aspects of traditional tank warfare I need to understand better. Skills I never fully developed because I was so focused on the technological components. Harrington felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the weight of responsibility, of passing on what he knew to those who would follow. It was what Bill would have wanted, what Bill himself had done throughout his career, shaping young soldiers into capable tankers who understood both the machine and the man who operated it. I leave Monday. That gives us 4 days. Harrington made a quick mental calculation considering what fundamentals could be conveyed in such a limited time frame. We'll start at 0600 tomorrow. Bring a canteen and a compass, no electronics. Mitchell smiled, anticipation replacing his earlier tension. Yes, sir. As the lieutenant walked away, Harrington pulled Jake's compass from his pocket, watching the needle align itself with magnetic north, steady and true. The old ways still had value. The challenge now would be integrating them with the new, creating a synthesis that would give the next generation of tankers the best of both worlds. He tucked the compass away and headed toward headquarters. He had preparations to make, both for Mitchell's crash course and for the Pentagon. The battle for the soul of tank warfare had entered a new phase, and he intended to be ready. The next morning found Harrington waiting at the eastern edge of the training grounds, the sun just beginning to crest the distant mountains. The air was still cool, the desert not yet awakened to its full scorching potential. He had brought nothing but a map case, a canteen, and Jake's compass, now hanging from a leather cord around his neck. The landscape stretched before him in shades of tan and russet, broken by the jagged silhouettes of rock formations and the occasional scrubby vegetation that somehow survived in this harsh environment. It was a terrain he knew intimately, had traversed in tanks and on foot for decades. Every ridge and wash, every subtle change in elevation held lessons for those who knew how to read them. Mitchell arrived precisely on time, dressed in field uniform with the requested canteen but otherwise unencumbered. His expression held determined anticipation, the look of a student ready to absorb new knowledge. Good morning, sir. Harrington nodded in acknowledgement. Today we're going to cover basic terrain navigation without technological aids. By the end of the day, I want you to be able to find your way across this desert using nothing but a map, compass, and your own observations. I've done land navigation exercises before, sir. There was no defensiveness in Mitchell's tone, merely a statement of fact. Not like this. Harrington handed Mitchell an old-style Linsatic compass, similar to the one that had belonged to Jake. It was solid and heavy in a way modern equipment rarely was, designed to function in conditions that would render more sophisticated instruments useless. Those exercises had checkpoints, safety monitors, and GPS backups. Today, it's just us, the desert, and our wits. The kind of situation you might face if your systems fail in hostile territory. They set out walking, Harrington leading Mitchell away from established trails into the more rugged terrain that dominated much of Fort Irwin. The sun climbed steadily higher, increasing the temperature with every passing minute. Sweat began to darken their uniforms as they navigated around rock outcroppings and across dry washes. As they walked, Harrington pointed out subtle features that most modern navigators, accustomed to digital interfaces and satellite imagery, would miss completely. The way certain plants indicated the presence of water below the surface, how the angle of rock formations provided orientation clues even when the sun was directly overhead, the subtle color variations in the soil that suggested changes in elevation. The desert speaks its own language, Harrington explained, as they paused atop a rocky overlook. Most people never learn to hear it because they're too busy looking at screens, but it can save your life when everything else fails. Mitchell absorbed the information with the focused intensity that had made him an exemplary technical officer. His questions were precise and intelligent, occasionally challenging assumptions, but always willing to consider new perspectives. By midday, they had covered nearly 10 miles of difficult terrain, and Mitchell was beginning to recognize patterns in the landscape that would have been invisible to him just hours before. Time for a break, Harrington announced, finding shade beneath an overhanging rock formation. They sat in silence for a while, drinking sparingly from their canteens, conserving energy in the mounting heat as experienced desert travelers learn to do. Sir, Mitchell finally said, breaking the comfortable silence, may I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Why tanks? What made you dedicate your life to armored warfare specifically? Harrington considered the question, gazing out across the desert landscape that stretched to the horizon. It wasn't something he'd articulated often, this core passion that had defined his military career. I grew up in Pennsylvania steel country. My father worked the mills, as did his father before him. When I joined the Army, tanks seemed like a natural fit. Steel given purpose, strength harnessed for protection. He paused, memories surfacing of his first encounter with an Abrams, the raw power he had felt as he touched its armored flank. But what made me stay was the crews. 4 men in a metal box, totally dependent on each other. There's an honesty in that environment you don't find many other places. No room for pretense or politics when you're sharing that kind of danger in proximity. Mitchell nodded, understanding dawning in his expression. I've experienced some of that. It's different from what I expected when I chose armor as my branch. Different how? More human. Mitchell searched for words, trying to articulate something he had felt but never formally analyzed. At West Point, they emphasized the technical aspects, the capabilities of the platform. But in an actual tank, he paused, then continued with growing certainty. It's more like becoming part of an organism than operating a machine. The boundary between man and metal blurs. That's well put. Harrington was impressed by the insight, especially coming from an officer who had initially seemed so focused on technological solutions. Remember that feeling. It's what separates tankers from system operators. They continued their training throughout the day, moving from basic navigation to more complex challenges. Harrington deliberately led them into areas where prominent landmarks were scarce, forcing Mitchell to rely on subtle environmental cues that would never appear on a digital map. By late afternoon, the lieutenant was navigating confidently, making only minor corrections to his chosen routes. You're a quick study, Harrington acknowledged, as they finally turned back toward the base, the setting sun at their backs. I had good technical training at the academy, just never had to apply it without technological backup before. Mitchell wiped sweat from his brow, his face reddened from the day's exposure. Makes me wonder what else I've learned but never truly tested. That's a good question for any officer to ask. Harrington felt a growing respect for Mitchell's adaptability. The lieutenant was proving to be more than just a technical expert. He had the intellectual flexibility that distinguished truly exceptional officers. They walked in companionable silence for a time, the setting sun casting the desert in deepening shades of red and purple. As the base came into view, Mitchell spoke again. Sir, about Master Sergeant Carter. I never got to know him well, but his performance during Red Thunder was extraordinary. The way he positioned his units, the timing of his movements, it was like watching a chess master who could see 3 moves ahead at all times. Harrington felt the now familiar pang at the mention of his friend. The grief was still raw, the absence still a physical presence beside him. Bill was one of the best, had an instinctive understanding of battlefield geometry that can't be taught. The men respected him enormously. You could see it in how they responded to his commands, even in the midst of confusion. Mitchell hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but uncertain of his footing in this personal territory. If it's not too personal, how long had you served together? 30 years on and off, since Desert Storm. He was my gunner during the ground war. Harrington's voice remained steady, though the memories threatened to overwhelm him. Bill as a young sergeant, eyes bright with determination as they'd pushed into Iraq. Bill in Bosnia, steadily reliable amid the political complexities. Bill in Afghanistan, adapting to yet another type of conflict with the same unflappable competence. We went through 3 tanks together over the years. Saw things, well, things that bind men together in ways civilians can't understand. Mitchell nodded, respecting the depth of loss his words had inadvertently evoked. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to. It's all right, Lieutenant. Bill wouldn't want to be forgotten. Harrington looked at the younger officer directly, seeing not just Mitchell, but all the officers who would follow, who would need to understand what men like Carter had known instinctively. That's something to remember as you move forward in your career. The technical specifications will change. The weapon systems will evolve. But the men, they're the constant. Honor them by remembering them. Not just the ones who die, but the ones who live, who serve under your command, who trust you with their lives. I will, sir. The simple promise held the weight of genuine commitment. They completed the journey back to base in silence, each man absorbed in his own thoughts. At the perimeter, Harrington stopped. "0600 tomorrow. Bring the same equipment, but be prepared to stay out overnight." Mitchell looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, sir." Over the next 3 days, Harrington subjected Mitchell to increasingly challenging scenarios. They conducted night navigation exercises, practiced emergency repairs on disabled vehicles using minimal tools, and spent hours discussing tactical problems that couldn't be solved with technology alone. On the final day, Harrington arranged for them to use 2 of the surrogate tanks for a practical demonstration. They drove deep into the training area, far from the usual exercise zones, to a region of broken terrain where ravines and rock formations created a natural maze, terrain that would challenge even the most sophisticated guidance systems. "This is where we'll conduct our final lesson," Harrington announced as they dismounted from the vehicles. He led Mitchell to a high point overlooking the surrounding landscape, the morning sun casting long shadows that accentuated every contour. "Today, I want you to plan and execute an ambush against a technologically superior force." Mitchell surveyed the landscape with a tactical eye, already applying the terrain reading skills he'd been developing. "With just 2 vehicles? 2 vehicles properly positioned can neutralize an entire platoon, Lieutenant. It's not about numbers, it's about position, timing, and psychology." Harrington gestured to the surrogate tanks, their worn silhouettes almost camouflaged against the desert backdrop. "These are our assets. I'll be your gunner. You'll command. The scenario is this. An enemy platoon of 4 M1A2s is passing through this area in 1 hour. Your mission is to disable at least 2 vehicles without losing either of ours." For the next 45 minutes, Mitchell analyzed the terrain, considered various positioning options, and developed a plan. Harrington observed without comment, noting how the lieutenant integrated his recent lessons into his thinking, how he factored in both the limitations of their equipment and the potential overconfidence of an adversary with superior technology. "I've made my decision," Mitchell finally said, pointing to locations on the map he had annotated during his analysis. "We'll position 1 vehicle here, in this depression behind the rock formation. It gives us cover, but maintains a clear field of fire along this approach." He indicated a natural corridor formed by 2 ridgelines. "The second vehicle will be here, on the reverse slope of this hill. From these positions, we can execute a crossfire ambush, hitting their flanks from 2 angles simultaneously." Harrington nodded approvingly, impressed by the tactical maturity of the plan. "And if they detect 1 vehicle, they'll focus their attention in that direction, making them even more vulnerable to the second. It's a calculated risk, but one that maximizes our advantages and exploits their likely response patterns. Let's execute." They positioned the surrogate tanks according to Mitchell's plan, camouflaging them with natural materials to enhance their concealment. Harrington served as gunner in Mitchell's tank, observing as the lieutenant made final adjustments to their position, ensuring maximum cover while maintaining clear fields of fire. "In a real engagement," Mitchell said as they waited for the simulated enemy force, "I'd be worried about their thermal imaging detecting our heat signatures." "Good concern. How would you mitigate that?" Mitchell thought for a moment, applying both his technical knowledge and his newly acquired appreciation for asymmetric tactics. "Engine off until the last possible moment. Use natural terrain features to mask our signature as much as possible. Perhaps even deploy thermal decoys if available, to draw their attention away from our actual positions." "All solid approaches," Harrington affirmed. "Remember, no technological advantage is absolute. There's always a countermeasure, always a weakness to exploit. The key is identifying it before the enemy identifies yours." When the simulated engagement began, Mitchell executed his plan with precision. The crossfire ambush caught the enemy force, represented by computerized targeting systems programmed to mimic M1A2 responses, completely by surprise. The first simulated shots disabled the lead vehicle, blocking the narrow passage and forcing the others to maneuver in confined spaces that negated many of their advantages. Within minutes, the simulation registered 3 disabled enemy tanks, with no losses to their own forces. "Excellent work, Lieutenant," Harrington acknowledged as they powered down the systems. "You've shown a solid grasp of the principles we've covered." Mitchell's expression was thoughtful as they conducted post-exercise checks. It's strange, at the academy and in regular training, we spent so much time learning to leverage our technological advantages. But here, we've been focusing on negating the enemy's advantages instead. Both approaches have merit, Harrington replied. The key is knowing when to apply each one. Technology can be a powerful force multiplier, but it can also create vulnerabilities if relied on too heavily. The best commanders understand both the capabilities and limitations of their equipment and have contingencies ready when systems fail. They drove the surrogate tanks back to base in the fading afternoon light, the desert around them transformed by the golden hour into a landscape of almost unearthly beauty. As they approached the motor pool, Mitchell broke the companionable silence. Sir, I want to thank you for these 4 days. They've changed my perspective in ways I didn't expect. Harrington nodded, recognizing the sincerity in the younger man's voice. That's the beginning of wisdom, Lieutenant. Being open to changing your mind when new evidence presents itself. I just wish, Mitchell trailed off, then continued more firmly. I wish my father could see it that way. Give him time. People who rise to his level have strong convictions. Those don't change overnight. If they change at all, Mitchell said with a hint of bitterness that spoke of deeper conflicts than mere professional disagreements. You might be surprised. Harrington thought of his upcoming Pentagon assignment, of the unexpected invitation from a general who had opposed everything he stood for. Sometimes the most rigid minds can bend when presented with the right approach. They parked the vehicles and completed the post-operation checks in efficient silence. As they were about to part ways, Harrington extended his hand. You've done well, Lieutenant. Keep asking questions. Keep testing assumptions, yours and others. That's what makes a good officer great. Mitchell shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. Safe travels to Washington. Good luck with the training, cadre. Remember what you've learned here. I will. As Mitchell walked away, Harrington felt a familiar presence, almost as if Bill Carter was standing beside him, offering his silent approval. You're doing what needs to be done, old friend, he thought, taking care of the next generation. The flight to Washington was uneventful. The transition from desert terrain to the urban landscape of the capital jarring in its abruptness. Harrington checked into the BOQ at Fort Myer, the quarter Spartan, but comfortable enough for his needs. Tomorrow he would report to the Pentagon, where General Mitchell awaited with his own agenda. He spent the evening reviewing his notes and preparing mentally for the confrontation he knew was coming. The general would not have requested his presence without a purpose, despite the official reason of consulting on training protocols. This was as much a political battle as a professional one, and Harrington had never been particularly adept at politics. But he did know tanks, and he knew men. Those would have to be his weapons in the battles ahead. The Pentagon was a maze of corridors and security checkpoints, designed to confuse and intimidate the uninitiated. Harrington navigated it with the same methodical approach he'd used to traverse deserts and battlefields, arriving precisely on time for his 0900 appointment with General Mitchell. The general's office was spacious and impeccably organized, with the expected array of challenge coins, unit photos, and commendations lining the walls. Mitchell himself sat behind a substantial desk, his posture as rigid as his expression. The family resemblance to his son was evident, but where the younger Mitchell had shown an increasing flexibility, the general's features seemed set in stone. Captain Harrington, he greeted, not rising. Welcome to Washington. Thank you, sir. Harrington stood at a relaxed position of attention, neither too formal nor too casual. Please sit. Mitchell gestured to a chair positioned before his desk, the arrangement clearly designed to establish hierarchical distance. I assume Colonel Wilson briefed you on why you're here. To consult on the revised training protocol, sir. Mitchell's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, following the unexpected results of Operation Red Thunder, certain elements within the Army leadership feel we need to reconsider our approach to tank crew training. The careful phrasing told Harrington everything he needed to know about the general's continued conviction in his original assessment. This wasn't a concession, it was a strategic retreat to more defensible ground. I understand there's a working group already formed, Harrington said. Yes, you'll be joining them this afternoon. Before that, however, I wanted to speak with you directly. Mitchell leaned forward slightly. Captain, I'm going to be blunt. I don't agree with the conclusions being drawn from Red Thunder. I believe the exercise was an anomaly, influenced by factors that won't be present in actual combat scenarios. Such as? The dust storm, for one, the restricted engagement parameters, the limited scope of the exercise. Mitchell's tone remained professional, but Harrington could hear the underlying frustration. In a full-scale engagement with multiple units and integrated command systems, the technological advantages of the M1A2 platform would have prevailed. Perhaps, Harrington acknowledged, choosing his words carefully, but dust storms and restricted parameters are precisely the kind of complications that arise in real combat, sir. No plan survives contact with the enemy, and no technology is immune to the friction of war. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "You sound like my son." The comment seemed to escape before the general could censor it, revealing more about the personal dimension of this professional conflict than Mitchell had likely intended. "Lieutenant Mitchell is an intelligent officer," Harrington replied neutrally. "He adapted quickly when his initial approach proved ineffective. That's a valuable quality in any commander. My son has made his choice." The words carried a weight of personal disappointment that Mitchell clearly hadn't intended to reveal. He straightened, regaining his professional demeanor. "The point is, Captain, that while you're here to consult, the final decisions about training protocols will be made by those with a broader strategic view. Translation: you'll be heard but not necessarily heeded." "I understand, sir." "Good." Mitchell handed him a folder. "These are the meeting details and your temporary credentials. The working group convenes at 1300 in Conference Room E." "Thank you, sir." Harrington rose, recognizing the dismissal. "One more thing, Captain." Mitchell's voice stopped him at the door. "Master Sergeant Carter was a fine soldier. His loss is felt throughout the armor community." The acknowledgement was unexpected, a brief glimpse of the man behind the general's stars. Harrington nodded, genuinely appreciative of the recognition. "Yes, sir, he was the best of us." The working group consisted of 8 officers and civilian specialists, ranging from majors to full colonels, with 2 PhDs from DARPA completing the assembly. They sat around a conference table laden with tablets, laptops, and stacks of technical documentation. Harrington, with only a notebook and pen, felt conspicuously analog among them. "Captain Harrington, welcome," greeted Colonel Westfield, the group's chair. "We've heard much about your performance during Red Thunder." "Thank you, sir. Please have a seat. We're just discussing the simulation-to-field training ratio for the revised protocol." Harrington settled into the indicated chair, quickly assessing the room's dynamics. Most of the officers regarded him with professional curiosity, but one of the DARPA scientists, a severe-looking woman with steel-rimmed glasses, watched him with barely concealed skepticism. "As I was saying," she continued, "our models indicate that a 50-30-20 ratio would maximize training effectiveness while reducing costs by 37%. 50% simulation, 30% restricted field exercises, 20% full-scale deployment," clarified a Lieutenant Colonel Harrington didn't recognize. "Correct. The simulation components would include both individual and unit-level virtual environments, with advanced biometric feedback to ensure physiological responses are properly conditioned." Harrington listened, making occasional notes, observing how the discussion flowed. The emphasis was heavily weighted toward technology, with repeated references to cost savings, efficiency metrics, and deployment readiness assessments. There was little mention of the human dimension, of the intangible qualities that separated elite units from merely competent ones. After nearly 30 minutes of technical discussion, Colonel Westfield finally turned to him. "Captain Harrington, you've been quiet. We'd value your perspective, given your unique experience." All eyes turned to him. Harrington closed his notebook deliberately. "With respect, I've been listening to a discussion about training platforms and efficiency metrics, but I haven't heard much about the men we're training." He looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. "The most sophisticated simulation can't replicate the feeling of being in a disabled tank in hostile territory. It can't teach the kind of rapid adaptation that occurs when plans disintegrate under enemy fire. It can't instill the trust that develops between a crew that has faced actual hardship together." "That's precisely why we're maintaining field components," the DARPA scientist interjected. "Dr. Eleanor Reed, Captain. I've developed simulation systems for the Army for 20 years. And I've commanded tanks in 3 wars, Dr. Reed," Harrington replied evenly. "I've lost men because equipment failed, because communications went down, because the unexpected happened. No simulation prepared them for those moments." "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" Colonel Westfield asked, his tone neutral but interested. "Reverse your ratio, 20% simulation for basic skills and initial tactical familiarity. 30% restricted field exercises to apply those skills in controlled environments. 50% full-scale deployment in environments that approximate combat conditions as closely as possible. That would triple current training costs, Dr. Reed objected immediately, and potentially reduce combat losses significantly, countered Harrington. How do you calculate the value of that trade-off, Doctor? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its directness. No one in the room could deny the human cost of inadequate training, but few were accustomed to having it stated so bluntly. Perhaps, suggested Lieutenant Colonel Harris, breaking the tension, we should consider a more gradual transition. Start with a 40-30-30 ratio and collect data on performance outcomes before committing to a final model. This compromise sparked a new round of discussion, with various participants offering refinements and alternatives. Harrington contributed where appropriate, always emphasizing the human element, the need for crews to experience the physical and psychological realities of tank warfare that no simulation could fully capture. By the end of the 3-hour session, the working group had agreed on a provisional 30-30 model with a 2-year evaluation period before final implementation. It wasn't the ratio Harrington had advocated, but it was better than the tech-heavy approach initially proposed. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Reed approached him, her expression less antagonistic than earlier. You make compelling arguments, Captain, despite your lack of technical background. I have a different kind of technical background, Doctor. One acquired through experience rather than research. She nodded, acknowledging the point. I believe in my simulations. They're the most advanced ever developed, with neural mapping capabilities that can recreate stress responses with 94% accuracy. I don't doubt their technical merits, but war has a way of creating the 6% you can't simulate. That's where men live or die. Fair enough. She extended her hand. I look forward to our continued discussions. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. Working group sessions where Harrington advocated for the human dimension of training, interspersed with individual meetings with key stakeholders in the Army's tank warfare doctrine. Throughout, he maintained a steady, reasoned approach, never becoming confrontational, but never backing down from his core convictions either. On the 4th day, he was summoned back to General Mitchell's office. The general's expression was unreadable as Harrington entered. I've been reviewing the working group's preliminary recommendations, Mitchell began without preamble. They appear to have been significantly influenced by your input. I've contributed my perspectives, sir. The group's conclusions represent a collective assessment. Mitchell studied him for a moment, his gaze evaluating. You know, Captain, when I first requested your presence here, it was partly to get you out of the field, to limit your influence on younger officers like my son. The admission was surprisingly candid. Harrington said nothing, waiting. But it seems your influence extends beyond personal interactions. Mitchell gestured to a report on his desk. Colonel Westfield speaks highly of your contributions. Even Dr. Reed, who rarely praises anyone without multiple PhDs, has acknowledged the validity of your perspective. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Mitchell stood, moving to the window that overlooked the Pentagon courtyard. I still believe in the transformative potential of technology in warfare. I've dedicated the latter part of my career to it. Technology has its place, sir. No one disputes that. Mitchell turned back to face him. But you dispute its primacy. You argue that no matter how advanced our systems become, the decisive factor remains the human element. Because that's what I've seen proven time and again. A long silence stretched between them. Two men of different generations and philosophies regarding the same fundamental questions about warfare and training. Finally, Mitchell spoke again. I've recommended that your temporary assignment be extended, Captain. The working group needs your continued input as they refine the training protocol. Harrington couldn't hide his surprise. May I ask why, sir? Because balanced perspectives lead to better outcomes. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. And because my son speaks of you with a respect I haven't heard him express for any officer in years. Lieutenant Mitchell has the potential to be an exceptional officer, sir. He combines technical proficiency with a willingness to learn from experience. That's rare. Yes, it is. Something like pride briefly crossed the general's features before his professional mask returned. You'll continue working with the group for another 3 weeks. By then, we should have a finalized protocol ready for field testing. Yes, sir. As Harrington turned to leave, Mitchell added, and Captain, when you return to Fort Irwin, tell my son. He hesitated, the personal and professional visibly warring within him. Tell him his approach to the Red Thunder after action analysis was methodologically sound. He demonstrated appropriate attention to detail and objectivity. It wasn't quite a personal message, but coming from General Mitchell, it represented a significant concession. I'll tell him, sir. The extended Pentagon assignment was both challenging and productive. The working group gradually coalesced around a training protocol that balanced technological and traditional approaches with built-in flexibility to adapt to different unit needs and mission parameters. Harrington's influence was evident throughout the document, though he was careful to ensure his contributions were presented as enhancements rather than criticisms of the existing approach. By the time he returned to Fort Irwin 3 weeks later, the base had transformed with the changing seasons. The spring heat had given way to the full, scorching intensity of desert summer. The landscape bleached to pale gold under the relentless sun. Lieutenant Mitchell met him at the airfield, his expression eager but composed. "Welcome back, sir. How was Washington?" "Educational." Harrington fell into step beside the younger officer as they walked to the waiting vehicle. "Your father sends a message." Mitchell's stride faltered almost imperceptibly. "Sir?" "He said your approach to the Red Thunder after-action analysis was methodologically sound. You demonstrated appropriate attention to detail and objectivity." A complex mixture of emotions crossed Mitchell's face. Surprise, satisfaction, a hint of lingering hurt. "That's unexpected." "It's a start," Harrington observed. "Your father is a proud man, Lieutenant. Change doesn't come easily to men like him, but it does come eventually if the evidence is compelling enough." Mitchell nodded, processing this. "In the training protocol, were you able to influence the final version?" "To an extent, we've achieved a more balanced approach than was initially proposed. The simulation components remain substantial, but there's greater emphasis on field exercises and contingency training." "That's good news." Mitchell gestured to the vehicle. "I've been implementing some of what you taught me with the training cadre. The results have been promising." As they drove back to the main base, Mitchell detailed the modifications he'd made to the standard training regimen, incorporating terrain navigation, emergency procedures, and tactical flexibility exercises. His approach was methodical yet innovative, blending traditional skills with modern techniques in ways that played to the strengths of both. "You've been busy," Harrington acknowledged, genuinely impressed. "I've had good guidance." Mitchell glanced at him. "The men still talk about Master Sergeant Carter. His influence continues." "As it should." They passed the memorial park where Carter's name had recently been added to the plaque honoring those who had died in service at Fort Irwin. Harrington made a mental note to visit later to spend some quiet moments remembering his friend. "There's something else you should know, sir," Mitchell said as they approached headquarters. "General Thornton has approved the formation of a special training unit. It's being called the Integrated Combat Effectiveness Team, ICET for short. The mission is to develop and test combined methods that incorporate both technological and traditional approaches." "And who's commanding this unit?" Mitchell smiled slightly. "You are, Captain, if you accept. I've been assigned as your XO." Harrington absorbed this unexpected development. "General Mitchell approved this?" "Not exactly, but he didn't block it either, which amounts to the same thing at his level." The opportunity was intriguing, a chance to directly influence the future of tank warfare training, to ensure that the lessons of Red Thunder weren't forgotten as newer technologies emerged. "I'll need to review the full mission parameters," Harrington said, already considering the possibilities. "Of course, sir. The complete briefing package is waiting in your office." As they parked outside headquarters, Harrington found himself reaching for Jake's compass, which had become a talisman of sorts during his Pentagon assignment. The needle swung true, pointing north with unwavering certainty. The path ahead was clear. Not easy, certainly, institutional change never was, but clear. He would build this new unit into a model for what tank warfare training could be, balancing the best of old and new approaches. He would honor Bill's legacy by ensuring that future generations of tankers were prepared not just for when technology worked, but for when it failed. And perhaps, in the process, he would help heal the rift between a father and son who were more alike than either would admit. Both stubborn, both dedicated, both committed to preparing soldiers for the harsh realities of modern warfare. Their methods differed, but their ultimate goal was the same. "Let's go see that briefing package," Harrington said, stepping out of the vehicle. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, but he barely noticed the heat. After weeks of air-conditioned Pentagon offices, the harsh environment felt like coming home. This was where he belonged, not in Washington conference rooms, but here, where theory met practice, where young men and women learned the skills that would keep them alive when theory failed. As he entered headquarters, Harrington felt a familiar presence walking beside him. Bill would have approved of this new mission, would have wanted to be part of it. In a way, he would be, for Jake, for Bill, for all of them. The work continued. Morning mist clung to the desert floor as the convoy of vehicles made its way across the Fort Irwin training grounds. 6 months had passed since the formation of the Integrated Combat Effectiveness Team, 6 months of intensive development and testing of the new training protocols. Today would be their final evaluation, a full-scale exercise observed by a delegation from the Pentagon, including General Richard Mitchell himself. Captain Frank Harrington rode in the lead vehicle, his weathered face betraying none of the tension he felt. The stakes couldn't be higher. This exercise would determine whether the program he had built would become a permanent part of Army doctrine or be relegated to an interesting but abandoned experiment. Beside him, Lieutenant Robert Mitchell drove with the focused intensity that had become his hallmark as executive officer of ICT. The desert stretched before them, bathed in the golden light of early morning. It was a landscape Harrington had come to know intimately over his decades of service. Every ridge and wash holding memories of training exercises, evaluations, and the occasional real-world preparation for deployment. Today, that familiar terrain would become the proving ground for everything he believed in. Weather report just came in, Mitchell said, glancing at Harrington as he navigated around a rocky outcropping. Possibility of dust storms by late afternoon. Harrington nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where dark clouds gathered at the edges of the desert. They had deliberately scheduled the exercise during the season when weather conditions were most unpredictable, wanting to demonstrate their team's adaptability under challenging circumstances. Mother Nature providing a little extra challenge, just like Red Thunder. There was a hint of anticipation in Mitchell's voice rather than concern. The younger officer had fully embraced the integrated training philosophy, finding in it a synthesis of his technical background and the practical wisdom Harrington had imparted. Let's hope without the casualties. Harrington's hand unconsciously moved to the pocket where Jake's compass rested, his talisman these past months. The memory of Bill Carter's collapse after their victory in Red Thunder remained a sobering reminder of the price that had been paid to reach this point. The formation of ICET had been controversial from the start. Their mission to develop a truly integrated approach to tank warfare training, combining the best of traditional methods with cutting-edge technology, had earned them supporters and detractors in equal measure. Traditional commanders saw them as too tech-focused. Modernization advocates considered them regressive throwbacks. Finding the middle ground had been a constant battle. For months, they had endured skepticism from both sides, accusations of wasting resources, and predictions of inevitable failure. Securing funding and personnel had required navigating a labyrinth of bureaucratic obstacles, made more challenging by the political sensitivities surrounding General Mitchell's original modernization initiative. But Harrington had persisted, driven by the conviction that the lessons of Red Thunder must not be forgotten. He had assembled a team of like-minded officers and NCOs who shared his vision of an approach that valued both innovation and tradition. Together, they had developed training protocols that challenged conventional wisdom while respecting established principles, creating something truly new yet grounded in proven fundamentals. The results spoke for themselves. Their trainees consistently outperformed conventionally trained units in evaluations, demonstrating superior adaptability and decision-making under stress. They had learned to operate as effectively when technology failed as when it functioned perfectly, developing a resilience that conventional training approaches couldn't match. Today's exercise would be the final proof of concept, the demonstration that would determine whether their approach would be adopted Army-wide. They arrived at the forward operating base that would serve as their command center for the exercise. The installation hummed with activity as crews prepared equipment and reviewed mission parameters. Tanks and support vehicles were positioned in precise formation, their crews conducting final checks with a disciplined efficiency that had become ICET's hallmark. Harrington stepped out of the vehicle, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. The months of intensive training were evident in every aspect of the operation. The smooth coordination between teams, the quiet confidence of the personnel, the meticulous attention to both technological and traditional preparation. Whatever happened today, he could at least take pride in what they had built together. Captain Harrington, The voice belonged to Colonel Westfield, who had chaired the Pentagon working group and now served as the evaluation team lead. His expression was professional but friendly as he approached. "All set for today?" "As ready as we'll ever be, sir." Harrington straightened slightly, conscious of the symbolic importance of projecting confidence. "Good. The observation team is assembling at the ridge overlook. General Mitchell arrived 20 minutes ago." Westfield lowered his voice slightly, a subtle indication that his next words were unofficial. "He's been reviewing your program documentation with considerable interest." "Has he indeed?" Harrington exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Mitchell, who had stiffened slightly at the mention of his father. The rift between them had narrowed in recent months but remained a sensitive subject. The general's sudden intense interest in ICT's documentation could be interpreted in multiple ways, not all of them favorable. "Remember, this isn't just about ICET," Westfield continued, his tone conveying the gravity of the situation. "The entire future direction of armor training is riding on today's results." "No pressure then," Harrington replied dryly, masking his concern behind veteran nonchalance. As Westfield departed, Harrington turned to Mitchell. "Brief the crews one last time. Emphasize contingency protocols. If those dust storms materialize, we'll need to execute Plan Delta." "Yes, sir." Mitchell moved off purposefully, gathering team leaders for the final briefing. While Mitchell handled the briefing, Harrington walked the perimeter of the base, checking equipment and speaking with crew members. Each team consisted of 4 personnel trained in both traditional and modern methods, capable of operating as effectively with manual systems as with the most advanced technology. They had been carefully selected and rigorously trained, representing the ideal synthesis Harrington had been working toward since Red Thunder had demonstrated the critical importance of balancing technological reliance with fundamental skills. The tanks themselves embodied this philosophy. They were standard M1A2 SCP V3 models, but each had been modified with additional manual backup systems and enhanced with specialized equipment that bridged the gap between traditional operation and digital integration. The modifications had required overcoming significant resistance from maintenance purists and technological standardization advocates. But Harrington had found allies in unexpected places, engineers who appreciated the practical wisdom of redundant systems, budgetary officials who recognized the potential long-term savings of increased survivability. These modified tanks allowed crews to transition seamlessly between high-tech and basic operation depending on battlefield conditions, a capability that had proven decisive in previous evaluations. They represented a physical manifestation of ICT's core philosophy, that the best approach was neither purely traditional nor exclusively technological, but a thoughtful integration of both. Among the crews was Sergeant Alex Rivera, the natural navigator who had first caught Harrington's attention during Red Thunder. Now, as Sergeant, Rivera had become one of ICT's standout success stories. His intuitive understanding of terrain complemented by technical expertise developed under the program. He embodied exactly what Harrington had been trying to achieve, a soldier who could leverage technology to its fullest while maintaining the fundamental skills to function when that technology failed. "Sergeant Rivera," Harrington acknowledged, approaching the young man as he completed pre-exercise checks on his tank. "How's your team feeling?" "Confident, sir." Rivera's face showed the calm assurance that came from thorough preparation. The nervous specialist of Red Thunder had matured into a poised NCO, trusted by his crew and respected by his peers. "We've run the scenarios forward and backward. We're ready." "Good. Remember, the evaluators will be looking for more than just mission completion. They want to see how you adapt when circumstances change." "Like the weather, sir?" Rivera nodded toward the darkening horizon where the promised storm front was gathering strength. "Exactly like the weather." Harrington clapped him on the shoulder, conveying confidence. "Make me proud out there." As Harrington completed his rounds, he found himself at the memorial marker erected for those who had died at Fort Irwin. Bill Carter's name gleamed in the morning light, the engraving still fresh compared to older entries. Harrington paused, allowing himself a moment of reflection. The loss still felt raw at times, a reminder of the human cost that sometimes accompanied even simulated warfare. Carter had believed in the integrated approach, had recognized the importance of balancing tradition and innovation. In many ways, ICET was as much his legacy as Harrington's. During the difficult early months of the program, when resistance had been at its strongest and resources at their scarcest, Harrington had often found himself returning to this spot, drawing strength from the memory of his friend's determination. Carter had never been one to back down from a challenge, had never accepted that something couldn't be done simply because it had never been done before. That spirit had infused ICT from its inception, becoming part of its organizational DNA. "We're almost there, Bill," he said quietly, running his fingers over the engraved name. "One more step to making sure what you taught us doesn't get forgotten." The exercise would begin at 900, a simulated combat scenario pitting ICET-trained teams against a conventional OPFOR unit. The objective was not merely to win, but to demonstrate the effectiveness of integrated training under various conditions, including equipment failures and environmental challenges. Each tank was fitted with sophisticated monitoring systems to record every action and decision for later analysis. At 0845, Harrington made his way to the command center where he would oversee the operation. The facility hummed with controlled activity, displays showing terrain maps, unit positions, and meteorological data. Lieutenant Mitchell was already there reviewing final intelligence reports on the OPFOR positioning. OPFOR has established 3 forward positions here, here, and here, Mitchell indicated on the digital map, his movements precise as he highlighted key tactical areas. They're anticipating a conventional approach through the central corridor, which is exactly why we won't give them one. Harrington studied the terrain, identifying vulnerabilities in the OPFOR positioning that a strictly technological approach might miss. Teams 1 and 3 will execute the flanking maneuver we discussed. Team 2 will feint toward the center to draw attention. What about the dust storm potential? Mitchell's question reflected the adaptive mindset ECAT had cultivated, always planning for contingencies, always expecting the unexpected. If visibility drops below 50%, we switch to Phase 2 protocols. Terrain navigation, pre-established rally points, communication through alternative channels. Harrington traced alternate routes on the map, routes that followed natural terrain features that would remain identifiable even in poor visibility. Each team commander has full authority to implement local adaptations as needed. Mitchell nodded, the plan requiring no further explanation between them. After months of working together, they had developed a shorthand that made extended discussion unnecessary. Each understood the other's thinking, a professional symbiosis that enhanced their effectiveness as a command team. "Sir," Mitchell said after a moment, his tone shifting slightly, "my father requested a meeting after the exercise, with both of us." Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Did he specify a reason?" "No, sir, just that it was important." The lieutenant's expression revealed a mixture of professional curiosity and personal apprehension. His relationship with his father remained complicated, a blend of military respect and filial tension. Before Harrington could respond, the radio crackled with the signal that the observation team was in position. The evaluators, including General Mitchell, were now watching from the ridge overlooking the training area, ready to assess every aspect of the operation. "We'll deal with that later," Harrington said, focusing on the immediate task. "Right now, let's make sure they have something worth observing." The exercise began precisely on schedule, the ICET teams moving out with disciplined coordination. From the command center, Harrington and Mitchell monitored their progress through a combination of digital feeds and traditional communication channels. The initial phases proceeded according to plan, with Team 2 successfully drawing OPFOR attention to the central corridor while Teams 1 and 3 maneuvered into flanking positions. The ICT crews operated with the seamless integration of technology and traditional skills that had been the program's focus. When digital systems provided clear advantage, they utilized them fully. When terrain or tactical situations made traditional approaches more effective, they switched without hesitation. This adaptability, this refusal to be doctrinaire about either approach, had been the key insight that had driven ICT's development. Then, at 10:37, the first complication arose. The weather front moved in faster than predicted, reducing visibility and interfering with some of the more sensitive electronic systems. Almost simultaneously, Team 3 reported mechanical issues with their main gun stabilization, a genuine malfunction rather than a simulated one. "Team 3, implement Protocol Whiskey," Harrington ordered. referring to the manual workaround they had practiced for just such a contingency. Team 1, adjust your approach to provide covering fire. The crews responded with practiced efficiency, adapting to the changing conditions without breaking momentum. Team 3 switched to manual gun control, compensating for the loss of stabilization through crew coordination and adjusted tactics. Team 1 shifted position to provide support, maintaining the overall tactical plan while accommodating their sister unit's temporary limitations. Where a conventional unit might have been paralyzed by the combination of mechanical failure and environmental degradation, the ISET teams switched seamlessly between technological and traditional methods. Their training had prepared them for exactly these circumstances, had taught them to view challenges as opportunities to demonstrate flexibility rather than obstacles to mission completion. By midday, the exercise had fully evolved into a test of the integrated approach. The dust storm had materialized as predicted, forcing all teams to rely increasingly on non-electronic navigation and communication. The OPFOR, initially confused by the unconventional tactics, had regrouped and was mounting a determined defense of their central position. Team 2 is taking heavy simulated fire, Mitchell reported, studying the tactical display where red indicators showed the intensity of the engagement. Their electronic countermeasures are being jammed. Order them to fall back to position Delta and switch to visual signaling, Harrington replied, implementing a contingency they had practiced repeatedly. Team 1 can exploit the gap on the eastern flank. The battle continued through the afternoon, a constant chess match of move and countermove. The OPFOR, though hampered by more conventional training, was well-led and resourceful. They adapted to ISET's unconventional approach, forcing Harrington's teams to demonstrate the full range of their integrated capabilities. As the dust storm intensified, visibility dropped to near zero in some sectors. Traditional navigation skills became paramount, with crews relying on terrain recognition and compass bearings rather than GPS and digital mapping. Communication shifted to predetermined signals and alternative channels as electronic systems suffered increasing interference. At 1542, just as the exercise entered its final phase, the command center's primary power system failed, a planned disruption that the evaluation team had introduced without warning. The backup generators kicked in, but many of the more advanced monitoring systems remained offline. Looks like they're testing us too, Harrington observed calmly, switching to manual plotting on a physical map. The transition was smooth, practiced, a demonstration of the principles they had been teaching. Mitchell nodded, already establishing alternative communication channels with the field teams. All teams acknowledge they're continuing under local command as per contingency planning. For the next 45 minutes, they operated with minimal technological support, relying on the same skills Harrington had taught Mitchell during their desert training sessions months before. The experience proved its value now as they maintained operational control despite the artificial limitations. When the exercise concluded at 16:30, the results were clear. The ICET teams had achieved all primary objectives and 78% of secondary objectives, despite the cascading challenges introduced by both nature and the evaluation team. More importantly, they had demonstrated the core principle of the program, that true combat effectiveness came not from relying exclusively on either technology or tradition, but from the seamless integration of both. As the teams returned to base, Harrington allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. 6 months of work, countless hours of training and refinement, all validated in a single afternoon of simulated combat. Bill would have been proud. The debriefing was scheduled for 1,800 hours, giving all participants time to reset equipment and prepare initial reports. Harrington used the interim period to visit each team personally, congratulating them on their performance and gathering firsthand impressions that might not make it into the official documentation. Rivera's team had performed particularly well, executing a daring flanking maneuver during the height of the dust storm that had caught the OPFOR completely by surprise. The maneuver had relied on Rivera's intuitive terrain reading ability combined with his technical expertise, a perfect embodiment of the ISET philosophy. Your navigation during zero visibility was exceptional, Harrington told him, as the team conducted post-exercise maintenance on their tank. How did you maintain your bearings when the GPS failed? Terrain association, sir, just like you taught Lieutenant Mitchell. Rivera's pride was evident but professional. We identified key features before the storm hit and used them as reference points. The digital systems are great when they work, but knowing how to navigate without them kept us moving when others might have stopped. That's exactly what we've been working toward, Harrington acknowledged. The best of both worlds. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the base, Harrington made his way to the conference facility where the debriefing would be held. The observation team was already assembled, including General Mitchell, whose expression revealed nothing of his assessment. Colonel Westfield began the proceedings with a general overview of the exercise parameters and initial performance metrics. The statistical analysis was promising, showing significant improvements in adaptability and mission success rates compared to conventional training approaches. The data is still being processed, Westfield concluded, gesturing to charts displayed on the presentation screen. But preliminary findings suggest that the ICID methodology produces more well-rounded combat units capable of operating effectively across a wider range of conditions. General Mitchell leaned forward, his first active engagement in the debriefing. And the cost-benefit analysis? Initial training costs are approximately 22% higher than standard protocols, Westfield acknowledged, addressing the question head-on. However, when factored against projected combat effectiveness and reduced casualty rates, the long-term cost efficiency actually improves by an estimated 15%. Mitchell nodded, making notes without further comment. The discussion continued, with various specialists addressing specific aspects of the exercise performance. Throughout, Harrington noticed that the general's attention remained particularly focused whenever his son spoke, though his expression remained professionally neutral. Finally, as the formal debriefing concluded, General Mitchell stood. "I'd like to speak with Captain Harrington and Lieutenant Mitchell privately. We'll use the adjacent office." As the others filed out, Harrington exchanged a glance with the younger Mitchell, who appeared as uncertain about this development as he was. They followed the general into the smaller room, where he closed the door and turned to face them. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was palpable, both professional and personal dimensions of their relationship hanging in the balance. Then General Mitchell broke the silence. "That was an impressive demonstration, gentlemen, particularly the response to the power failure we introduced." "Thank you, sir," Harrington replied. "The teams performed exactly as trained." "Yes, they did." Mitchell's gaze shifted to his son. "Your input was particularly evident in the electronic countermeasures protocols, Lieutenant." Robert Mitchell straightened slightly, a subtle reaction to this unexpected professional acknowledgement from his father. "I applied what I learned during our desert training sessions, sir, combined with my technical background." The general nodded, something like approval briefly crossing his features. "The integration was more seamless than I had anticipated." He turned back to Harrington. "You've made your point, Captain, quite effectively." "And the point was never to discredit technological advancement, sir," Harrington clarified, wanting to ensure there was no misunderstanding. "Only to ensure that we don't lose foundational skills in the process." "So I've come to understand." Mitchell moved to the window, looking out at the gathering dusk. His silhouette against the fading light seemed less rigid than usual, suggesting a man perhaps reconsidering long-held positions. "The Joint Chiefs will be receiving my full report next week. I intend to recommend that the ICID program be expanded to 3 additional training centers, with you retaining oversight of implementation." The news was unexpected. Harrington had hoped for approval to continue the program, but expansion to additional centers represented a level of endorsement he hadn't dared anticipate. It was a vindication of everything they had worked for, a recognition that the integrated approach had merit at the highest levels. "Thank you, sir." Mitchell turned back, his expression softening slightly. "When we began this process, Captain, I viewed you as an obstacle to progress, a relic of an outdated approach that was holding the Armor Corps back from necessary evolution." "And now, sir," Harrington asked, genuinely curious about the general's evolution. "Now I recognize that true evolution doesn't mean discarding what came before. It means building upon it." The general's gaze moved between them. "You two have demonstrated that quite effectively, together." The emphasis on the last word carried significance beyond the professional assessment. This was as close as the general would come to acknowledging the personal dimension of their collaboration. that his son and Harrington had formed a partnership that transcended their initial positions. There's one more thing, Mitchell continued. The expansion will require a formal command structure beyond what you currently have. I'm recommending that ICAT be elevated to independent battalion status, with corresponding rank adjustments for key personnel. The implications were clear. Such a reorganization would mean promotion for both Harrington and the younger Mitchell, formal recognition of their leadership roles in the program's development. That's generous, sir, Harrington said carefully, wary of appearing too eager. It's practical. The program needs the authority and resources to succeed on a larger scale. Mitchell's tone shifted, becoming less formal. And Robert, the use of his son's first name hung in the air, a departure from the professional distance he had maintained throughout their previous interactions. Yes, sir? Lieutenant Mitchell's voice betrayed a hint of tension. Your mother asked me to remind you that you're expected for dinner next Sunday. Apparently you have been missing your regular calls. The mundane domestic concern, delivered in the midst of a professional military discussion, created a moment of surreal contrast. Robert Mitchell blinked, clearly caught off guard by this sudden shift into personal territory. I've been preoccupied with the exercise preparations, sir. Understandable, but as you've so effectively demonstrated today, balance is essential. The ghost of a smile touched the general's lips, even between professional demands and family obligations. It was an olive branch, offered in the general's characteristically indirect manner, a small acknowledgement that perhaps the rift between them might be healable, that professional respect might lead to personal reconciliation. I'll call her tomorrow, Robert promised, his expression a complex mixture of surprise and cautious hope. Good. The general straightened, returning to his formal bearing. I'll expect your detailed after-action reports by 0900 Monday. The expanded program proposal will need to be on the secretary's desk by the end of next week. Yes, sir, they replied in unison. As General Mitchell departed, Harrington and the younger Mitchell stood in silence for a moment, processing the unexpected developments. Did that just happen? Robert finally asked, still looking slightly stunned. It did. Harrington smiled slightly. Apparently, I'm not the only one who can adapt when presented with compelling evidence. They made their way back to the command center to begin the extensive documentation that would be required. The base had settled into evening routine, the day's tension giving way to the quiet efficiency of after-action procedures. Teams were conducting equipment maintenance, preparing reports, and engaging in informal debriefs over coffee and MREs. As they walked, Harrington noticed a solitary figure standing near the memorial marker where Bill Carter's name was inscribed. It was Sergeant Rivera, his posture respectful as he studied the names. Go ahead, Harrington told Mitchell. I'll join you shortly. He approached Rivera, who came to attention when he noticed Harrington's arrival. At ease, Sergeant. Paying your respects? Yes, sir. Rivera relaxed slightly. I never knew Master Sergeant Carter personally, but everyone talks about how he was the heart of what we're doing now. Seemed right to thank him. Harrington nodded, touched by the gesture. He would have appreciated that. The old and the new, working together, Rivera continued thoughtfully. That was his vision too, wasn't it? Not just yours. It was. Harrington looked at the marker, remembering his last conversation with Bill. He understood that progress doesn't mean abandoning what came before. It means building on the foundation. Like today's exercise, when the electronics went down, we still completed the mission because we had backup skills to fall back on. Exactly like that. Harrington studied the young sergeant, seeing in him the future of the Armor Corps, technically proficient but grounded in fundamentals, innovative but respectful of tradition. You did well out there today, Rivera. Your team's performance was exemplary. Thank you, sir. Rivera hesitated, then added, is it true what they're saying, that the program's going to expand? News travels fast. It's a small base, sir, and good news travels fastest. Harrington smiled. Yes, it's being expanded, which means we'll need experienced team leaders who understand the integrated approach from the ground up. I'd be honored to continue with the program, sir. Good, because you're on the short list for promotion to team leader in the expanded structure. Harrington clapped him on the shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning for the next phase. As Rivera departed, Harrington remained at the memorial for a moment longer. The desert night was settling in, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars Bill had once compared to those over Baghdad, the same stars that had guided soldiers for millennia before electronics and GPS. Some things changed, some remained constant. The wisdom lay in knowing which was which. He touched the marker briefly, a silent acknowledgement, then turned and headed toward the command center where Mitchell waited. There was work to be done, reports to compile, futures to plan. For Jake, for Bill, for all of them. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the desert refreshed after the previous day's storms. Harrington rose early, as was his habit, and made his way to the motor pool where the tank stood in silent formation. The exercise vehicles were being serviced, crews already at work preparing for the day's tasks. Captain Harrington, he turned to find Colonel Westfield approaching, a tablet in hand and a satisfied expression on his face. Colonel, up early. Final performance metrics just came in. I thought you'd want to see them immediately. Westfield handed him the tablet. They're even better than our preliminary assessment indicated. Harrington scrolled through the data, noting the key indicators: mission success rates, adaptation metrics, crew cohesion scores, all substantially higher than conventional training outcomes. The evidence was undeniable. This should satisfy even the most skeptical observers, Westfield remarked. The Joint Chiefs will have no choice but to approve the expansion. There will still be resistance, Harrington cautioned. Change never comes easily, especially in an institution as tradition-bound as the Army. But it does come with the right evidence and the right advocates. Westfield took back the tablet. General Mitchell's support will be crucial in that regard, and I must say his conversion to your approach has been surprising. Sometimes people just need to see results for themselves. Westfield studied him. It's more than that, I think. The general has been watching how you've worked with his son, the professional development you've fostered. Harrington hadn't considered that angle. Lieutenant Mitchell is an exceptional officer. He'd have excelled under any mentor. Perhaps, but the particular blend of technical expertise and adaptability he's developed under your guidance, that's unique, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. As they discussed the next steps in the program expansion, Harrington saw Lieutenant Mitchell approaching from the direction of the officers' quarters. His expression suggested news of some significance. "Excuse me, Colonel," Harrington said as Mitchell reached them. "Is everything all right, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir, but I've just received a communication from Fort Knox. They want to send an observer team to study our training methods firsthand." Westfield raised his eyebrows. "The armor school itself is interested? That's a significant development." "Very significant," Harrington agreed. Fort Knox housed the U.S. Army Armor School, the institutional heart of tank warfare doctrine. Their interests suggested that the impact of ICET might extend beyond operational training into the fundamental education of armor officers. "They're requesting a 2-week immersion for 3 of their senior instructors," Mitchell continued, "starting next month. We'll need to develop a comprehensive demonstration program," Harrington said, already considering the implications. "Something that showcases both the technological and traditional elements in equal measure." "I'll start working on it immediately, sir." As Mitchell departed to begin preparations, Westfield chuckled. "You've started something significant here, Captain. More significant than I think you realize." "We've started something," Harrington corrected. "It's been a team effort from the beginning." "Well, indeed it has, and speaking of teams, I should check on the evaluation group. We've got our own reports to file." Westfield extended his hand. "Congratulations again, Captain. What you've accomplished here will influence armor training for years to come." After Westfield left, Harrington continued his morning inspection of the vehicles. Each tank represented countless hours of training, refinement, and integration of old and new approaches. Each crew embodied the philosophy that had guided ICEE from its inception: respect for tradition, coupled with embrace of innovation. He paused beside the tank that had once been Bill Carter's up-for vehicle during Red Thunder. It had been refitted and upgraded for the ICET program, but still retained some of its original character. Harrington ran a hand along its armored side, feeling the connection to his friend in the solid metal beneath his palm. "Sir." The voice belonged to a young specialist he recognized as one of Rivera's crew members. "Sergeant Rivera asked me to give you this." She handed him a small package wrapped in cloth. Harrington unwrapped it to find a brass plate inscribed with the ICET insignia, a modern tank silhouette overlaid on a compass rose. Below the image were the words, "Honoring tradition, embracing innovation." The sergeant had it made for you, said something about a proper legacy for Master Sergeant Carter. Harrington nodded, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. Thank him for me. It's perfect. As the specialist departed, Harrington studied the brass plate, its weight solid in his hand. It encapsulated everything they had been working toward. Not the rejection of the past or blind embrace of the future, but the thoughtful integration of both. He made a mental note to have it mounted in the ICET headquarters, a daily reminder of their mission and the man who had helped inspire it. The legacy endured, for Jake, for Bill, for all of them.